C# is a very popular programming language for writing .NET applications. Many people consider it the primary language for .NET and rarely consider using the other in-box languages. For most of the examples in this course, I will be using C#, so this is a good time to explore the basics of the C# language and its code editor. I have a solution with two projects, a C# console project and a VB console project. This is the default console. Most console applications have a program.cs, or in VB, down here you can see it's called module1.vb. And inside the program.cs, you'll find a main method. Now, all .NET methods have to have a main method, but usually you don't see them. It's more obvious in a console application. This is where the application starts. This is where you set up your code. This is where you call all your other methods. It's a static method, and by default, it has an array of strings. This is how you get information passed in from the command line. It's not necessary to have these here. I can delete this out of this method and still compile the application. I just did a Control-Shift-B to compile, and you see that it works just fine. What I want to do is write some code to open a text file and output some text to the console. To do that, I need a file. I'm going to embed one in my application. You can right-click on your project and add an existing item. Since I already have a copy of the file in my VB project, I'm just going to copy it and then paste it into my C# console application. Now, I want to make this part of my project, so I mark it build action as content. That means it gets copied to my output directory, and I mark it to copy if it's a newer version of the file. Next thing I want to do is show you how to add a class. Right-click, choose Add Class. The name of this class is going to be FileLister. Then I click on Add. Classes are containers for code and for data. This one's mostly going to be code in this example. What I want to do is create three methods that are going to get called from this class. I'm going to make them static methods. So you start by saying public static void. This is the return type of this function or this method as they're known in .NET. Public static void, and then the name of my method. Methods in C# always end with a set of open and close parentheses, and then you have a set of curly braces for the code to live inside. I'm going to copy this 2 more times, and then I'm going to name this one add name. And this one's going to take a parameter of type string called new name. And this method is going to be called print formatted names. Okay, I'm ready to go. I'll go up to this print names. I'll start writing my code here. The first thing I want to talk about in C# is you do comments by doing 2 slashes. Next, when you want to create a variable, you can either use the type of the variable, let's say string, like that. And then you can assign a value to the variable by saying file text equal. And then here I'm going to make a method call out to the .NET Framework to get the contents of that file. So I'm going to work with the file class. Now, as you can see, the file class is not showing up in my list. That's because the true name of this class is longer. It's system.io.file. Now I'm going to call the readAllText method. Pass it in the file name. And then end the line of code with a semicolon. That's one line of code. If I want to split this across multiple lines, C# still sees this as a single line of code, even though it's on 2 physical lines inside the code editor. Another way of declaring a variable is using the var keyword. And what this does is tell the compiler to figure out the type. And I don't want to keep typing this system.io every time I use the file class. So that's why we have these using statements at the top of our document. I can take this bit of code, remove it from here, add a using statement at the top, like that. And now I no longer have to type system.io every time I want to use the file class or any other class that lives inside this namespace. So now here I'm going to say what's the difference between these two methods? This method reads the file and returns it as one single string. This method reads the file and returns it as an array of strings. So now that I have an array, I can say console.writeLine. I'm asking for the third item out of this array, and then I'm going to print it to the console. Now, I can't call it yet unless I call this method from my program.cs. So I'll go over here and say file lister dot print names, and I'm ready to run. C# is my starting project. You can tell because it's in bold. Now I'm going to go up and say debug, start without debugging, and there's my Jones last name. To speed things up, I've got some of the code already written. I'll open up this file and I'll take these 2 lines of code here for adding a name, copy those, then return to my file lister and paste them into the add name. And then for the printed format name, I'll do the same thing. Copy these, return over to my C# file, and paste those in. So what this one does is take a new string name in, it appends the text to the text file, it adds a line feed character return to the file, and then it writes out the new name. And then this one will loop through all the items in the file and output them to the console and format them based on the index number and the file lines. Now to use these, I'm going to copy this code too so I don't have to type it in. And go over to program.cs. And then again, I'll run the application, debug, start without debugging. Scroll up to the top of this list, there's Jones, and then there's my list of files. And since I added my last name to the list, it should show up here at the bottom. There it is. So what I want you to take away from this is some of the features of the Visual Studio Editor and some of the features of C#. Now, I mentioned VB in this title. VB and C# are very similar. I already have a VB console application written here. Let's see what's different. Instead of being called program.cs, it's called module1.vb. But it has a main method with no parameters. I created a class over here called FileLister. The code's a little bit different. It's public class. They use capital letters, or Pascal casing they call it, for public and class. You use the imports keyword instead of the using statement, but it's the same idea. You don't end a line of code in VB with a semicolon. You end it by hitting the Enter key on the keyboard. And it's smart enough in the newest version of Visual Basic to know when you split a line across 2 lines that that's considered to be 2 lines. For those of you that have done Visual Basic in the past, this is a relatively new feature. Comments are done with an apostrophe instead of 2 slashes. And instead of using the static keyword, we use the shared keyword. And if you're not returning anything from a function, it's called a sub, not a function. But other than that, the code's the same, right? You look here, it's append text. The for each loop is slightly different, but the way I called console.writeLine and the way I called format, they're very similar. So it's very easy for you to transition as a developer between Visual Basic and C# and back. So in conclusion, I'd like to say that both the VB and C# editors are very full-featured and enhance your daily coding chores. I'll show you more of the tools available in these editors throughout the course.